Welcome, dreamers. Close your eyes and let the world fall away. Tonight we journey into a snow-laden forest where a mysterious shop appears, offering more than warmth to a weary traveler. Let the whispers of winter guide you into a tale of wonder and secrets. Breathe deeply, relax, and drift into a peaceful slumber as the story unfolds. Aira trudged through the snowstorm, her breath a pale ghost that fled into the howling wind. The storm had come from nowhere, transforming the quiet forest path into an impassable sea of white. She clutched her cloak tighter, cursing her decision to venture out so late. The village was miles behind her, and the distant glow of the next settlement was swallowed by the blizzard's fury. It was then, through the swirling chaos, that she saw it, a faint light flickering like a distant star. With no other options, she followed it, her boots sinking deep into the drifts. As she drew closer, the light resolved into the shape of a crooked sign hanging above a wooden door. The letters carved into the weathered wood read, "Curiosities and Wonders." The shop should not have been there. Aira had walked this path many times and never seen such a place. Yet when she pressed her trembling hands to the door and pushed it open, warmth spilled over her like an embrace. Inside, the shop was a labyrinth of shelves, stacked high with objects that seemed to hum with quiet secrets. A tarnished compass spun without pause in its velvet-lined box. Candles that burned with black flames lit the corners, casting elongated shadows. And there, behind the counter, sat the shopkeeper. He, or she, for their form was draped in layers of patchwork cloaks, looked up as Aira entered. The hood obscured their face, but their voice was smooth and low, as though carved from the same ancient wood as the shelves. "Lost, are we?" the shopkeeper asked, their gloved hands resting lightly on the counter. "I need shelter," Aira said, her voice hoarse from the cold. "The storm." "Ah, storms?" The shopkeeper rose, moving with an unsettling fluidity. "They do have a way of bringing people to my door." Aira frowned. Something about the shopkeeper's tone made her uneasy, but she was too cold and tired to question it. "I just need to rest for a moment," she said. "Then I'll be on my way." The shopkeeper tilted their head as though considering her. A moment then, "But perhaps fate brought you here for more than warmth." Before Aira could respond, they disappeared into the shelves, returning moments later with an object cradled in their hands, a snow globe. It was no larger than an apple, its glass surface catching the candlelight. Inside was a scene of breathtaking detail, a tiny kingdom blanketed in snow. Towers of ice glittered under a painted sky, and minuscule figures moved through streets that seemed alive. "This," the shopkeeper said, placing the snow globe before her, "is yours." Aira blinked. "I don't understand." The shopkeeper's laugh was soft, like the rustle of dried leaves. Payment for your kindness, let's call it. You saved me a great deal of trouble when you caught that shelf. Era glanced at the tilted shelf by the door, its contents now securely stacked. She hadn't even thought about it when she'd steadied it upon entering, but the shopkeeper's gaze seemed to see far more than the moment warranted. "I can't accept this," she said, reaching to push the snow globe back. "It's beautiful, but it is already yours," the shopkeeper interrupted, their tone brooking no argument. "But heed my warning, girl. The snow globe is no ordinary trinket. It will ask much of you." Era opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, the shopkeeper was gone, leaving her alone in the shop's eerie silence. The storm outside had ceased as suddenly as it began. Clutching the snow globe in her hands, Era felt an unfamiliar chill. Not from the cold, but from the glass, as though it pulsed with a heartbeat all its own. She stepped back into the night, the snow globe tucked carefully in her satchel. Above her, the sky was clear, and 1,000 stars glittered like shards of ice. The storm was gone, but Era couldn't shake the feeling that something far stranger had taken its place. Back in her modest cottage at the edge of the woods, Era had placed the snow globe on her rickety table. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting flickering shadows across the walls. Outside, the forest was still, its usual nightly hum muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She hadn't intended to keep the globe. It had the air of something precious, too precious for someone like her. But she couldn't bring herself to part with it. The tiny kingdom within seemed to call to her, its intricate towers glinting in the firelight. She leaned closer, marveling at the detail. It wasn't just the towers or the streets. The people moved. She could swear she saw their tiny breaths rise like wisps of mist. Era hesitated, her fingers brushing the glass. For a moment, she imagined she heard something faint, almost like a sigh. She pulled her hand back sharply. "Just the wind," she muttered, shaking her head. But the whispering didn't stop. Over the next few days, it grew more insistent, a murmur that drifted just below the edge of hearing. At first, Era dismissed it as fatigue. Her nights had been restless since she brought the globe home. Her dreams filled with snow-laden streets and cold, watchful eyes. Yet every morning, she would find herself drawn back to the globe, unable to resist its mysterious allure. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the snow in shades of gold and pink, Era finally gave in. She sat before the globe, resting her hands on either side of it, and listened. This time, the whispers sharpened, forming words. "Save us!" She recoiled, nearly knocking the globe off the table. The voice had been softer, but clear, like a breeze carrying secrets. Era's heart raced. She leaned in cautiously. "Save us!" the voice repeated, no louder than a breath. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The globe shimmered, tiny flakes inside swirling violently. The scene within seemed to shift, the snow clearing to reveal new details. Aira saw tiny figures, people, kneeling in a circle around a faintly glowing emblem in the center of the kingdom. Their heads were bowed, their movements slow and weary. "We are the cursed," the voice said, its tone heavy with despair. "Trapped in the winter of our own making." Aira's throat tightened. She glanced around the room, half expecting to find someone else there, but she was alone. Only the globe glimmered with unnatural light. "What do you want from me?" she asked cautiously. The swirling snow calmed, settling back over the kingdom like a veil. The voice faded, leaving behind only the faintest echo. "Find the way," it said. "Break the frost." Before Aira could ask more, the light within the globe dimmed and the whispers ceased. The room felt colder, the fire in the hearth no longer warm enough to chase away the chill creeping into her bones. She sat back, clutching her arms. That night, her dreams were more vivid than ever. She stood in the snow-laden streets of the miniature kingdom, the icy air biting her skin. The people from the globe surrounded her, their faces pale and weary. They didn't speak, but their eyes pleaded with her. In the center of their circle, the glowing emblem pulsed like a heartbeat. When she awoke, the first rays of sunlight spilling through her window, Aira felt the weight of their despair clinging to her. She turned her gaze to the snow globe, which sat innocently on the table. It no longer shimmered or whispered, but its silence felt watchful. Determined to understand, Aira searched her shelves for the old books she had inherited from her grandmother, a healer and collector of tales. Among them was a weathered volume on the magic of objects, its pages brittle with age. As she flipped through, she found a passage about enchanted globes, though it spoke in riddles. To wield the frost is to carry its burden. Beware the whispers of winter, for they hold truth and cost alike. She set the book down with trembling hands, her breath visible in the sudden chill that filled the room. Aira realized the whispers were not just voices of the trapped. They were a summons. The snow globe's magic was seeping into her world, and it would not rest until she answered its call. The days that followed were marked by strange phenomena. Frost crept across Aira's windows, painting delicate fractal patterns that did not melt even when the sun shone. Her breath clouded the air indoors, despite the fire roaring in the hearth. But it wasn't only her surroundings that changed. Aira herself began to feel the snow globe's influence. It started subtly. Her fingers tingled with cold that no amount of warmth could banish. And when she touched objects, they sometimes grew slick with frost. The first time she noticed this, she dropped her wooden spoon into the stew pot, startled as the edges of the spoon turned white and brittle. It was on one such day, as she gazed into the snow globe, that she dared to test its power. She held the globe between her hands, feeling its icy pulse. Closing her eyes, she thought of snow, soft, falling snow, blanketing the forest outside. When she opened her eyes, flakes were drifting lazily beyond the window pane, despite the cloudless sky. Era gasped, her heart racing with a mix of awe and fear. She stepped outside, the snow globe clutched in her hands. The trees around her were sheathed in frost, their branches heavy with ice. Snow blanketed the forest floor, muffling her footsteps. She tilted her head back, letting the flakes land on her skin. For the first time, she felt truly powerful. The world answered her whims, bending to her silent command. She laughed softly, spinning in the snow, her cloak billowing around her. But as she turned, she caught a glimpse of the snow globe in her hands. The tiny kingdom inside had grown darker, its glow dimmed as if her act had drained it. The whispers returned that night, louder and more urgent than before. "Release us," they pleaded. "Each snow you summon deepens our frost." Ira tried to ignore them, but her dreams were unrelenting. She saw herself standing atop the ice towers of the kingdom, her hands crackling with frost. The people below cowered as snow swirled around her. When she awoke, her hands were numb, her fingers tinged with blue. Desperate for answers, she decided to return to the curio shop. She wrapped the globe in cloth and set off into the woods. Snow still clung to the trees and ground, though the sky above was clear and bright. The air grew colder the closer she came to where the shop had stood. But when she reached the spot, there was nothing there, only untouched snow and a silence so deep it seemed to hum in her ears. Era fell to her knees, clutching the globe. "Where are you?" she cried, her breath a frozen cloud. "What have you done to me?" The globe's surface grew colder in her hands, the frost biting through the cloth. Then for the first time, the whispering became a voice. A woman's voice, low and sharp as breaking ice. "You were warned, child." Era spun around, and there she was. The shopkeeper, or rather, what remained of her. The cloaks were gone, revealing a figure of brittle frost and cracked ice. Her eyes glinted like shards of frozen glass. "You?" Era whispered, her voice trembling. "You're the Winter Witch." "I was," the witch said, her voice heavy with centuries of weariness. "Until I bound myself to that cursed thing." Iris stared at the globe in her hands. "You mean this trapped you too?" The witch nodded, stepping closer. Her movements were slow, as if the weight of her form might shatter her at any moment. It traps all who wield it. Each storm you summon drains its light and strengthens its curse. The kingdom within grows colder, and the magic feeds on you. Era's knees gave way, and she sank into the snow. "But I didn't know." "You know now," the witch interrupted. Her icy hand reached out, brushing Ira's cheek. The touch burned with cold. "You have a choice. Break the globe, and the kingdom may be free. Or keep it, and you will take my place." Era stared into the witch's frozen eyes, her own heart pounding. "What happens if I break it?" The witch's expression turned grave. "The frost will spill into your world. Winter without end." Era felt the weight of the globe in her hands, heavier than ever before. The whispers within it were frantic now, the voices overlapping. She could feel the burden of their despair and the pull of the power she was reluctant to give up. Her fingers tightened around the globe as a bitter wind howled through the trees. She realized that no matter what she chose, the price would be steep. The frost-ridden figure of the Winter Witch stood unmoving, her crystalline eyes locked onto Era. Around them, the air had grown still, the wind no longer daring to disrupt the moment. In her hands, Era held the snow globe as though it were a fragile thing, yet its weight seemed unbearable. The voices inside had subsided, replaced by a low, thrumming hum that resonated deep in her chest. "What will happen to me?" Era finally whispered. Her voice wavered, but the question held the strength of her desperation. The witch tilted her head, the motion crackling like ice underfoot. "You will carry the curse as I have," she said. "The power will feed on you until you are like me, a hollow shell of frost and regret. You will bring winter to the world, but it will take your warmth in return." Era's fingers trembled around the globe. The frost spreading up her arms seemed to tighten its grip, as though eager to claim her entirely. "There must be another way," she said, her voice laced with pleading. The Winter Witch's laugh was brittle, sharp as shards of broken glass. "Always, the cursed ask for another way. If there was one, do you think I would stand before you now, bound by ice and time?" "But the people inside," Era insisted. "They're alive. They're trapped. Don't they deserve to be free?" The witch's expression softened, a fleeting shadow of sorrow passing across her face. "They do. And yet, they are my burden no longer. I sold that burden to you as it was sold to me." Her gaze bore into Ira, cold and unyielding. "Do you think yourself selfless enough to make the choice I could not?" Era opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. She thought of the tiny figures in the globe, their weary faces, their endless prayers. She thought of her dreams, of the way their frozen kingdom had crept into her mind. She thought of the power she had wielded and the thrill it brought, even as it hollowed her. "You could keep it," the witch said, as though reading her thoughts. "Keep the power. It is tempting, is it not? To bend the frost to your will, to never again be helpless in the face of the world's storms. All it asks of you is everything." Era's grip on the globe tightened. "And if I break it?" The witch stepped closer, her fragile form seeming to blur in the cold light. "If you break it, the kingdom may be free. But the frost will escape as well. Your world will become theirs. An endless winter. Era shuddered. The forest around her already felt like a shadow of that frozen kingdom. Snow clung to the trees in unnatural stillness, and the air was thick with the weight of something old and watching. She turned her gaze back to the globe. The tiny kingdom was dimmer now, the figures inside moving more slowly, as though their strength was fading. There has to be another way, she said again. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they were hollow. The witch had given her the truth, and it was cruelly simple: to hold the globe or to shatter it. Either way, the cost was unimaginable. The winter witch's gaze lingered on her, unreadable. You will choose soon, she said, or the globe will choose for you. With that, the witch stepped back, her form dissolving into a flurry of snow and ice that scattered in the wind. Era blinked, and she was gone, the forest eerily silent once more. Era clutched the globe to her chest, its cold sinking into her skin. The whispers returned, faint but persistent. "Save us," they begged, "please." Tears pricked her eyes as she stumbled back toward her cottage. Each step felt heavier than the last, the frost creeping further up her arms. By the time she reached the door, her fingers were stiff and numb. She collapsed onto the chair by the fire, staring into the flickering flames as the snow globe rested on the table before her. The firelight reflected off its surface, casting an otherworldly glow. The whispers rose and fell like a tide, the voices of the trapped pleading with her, mingling with the witch's warning that still echoed in her mind. Era buried her face in her hands, the cold seeping through her resolve. The choice loomed over her, immense and unyielding. The weight of it pressed down on her, as heavy as the snow that blanketed the world outside. The fire crackled weakly in the hearth, struggling against the cold that seemed to emanate from the snow globe on the table. Era sat motionless, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from trembling. The whispers had grown faint, almost imperceptible, but their weight lingered in her chest like a stone. Her gaze locked on the snow globe, its tiny kingdom frozen in its endless winter. The towers glittered dimly, and the figures inside moved sluggishly, as though burdened by an invisible weight. Their world, so small yet impossibly vast, felt alive in a way that made her pulse quicken. Era reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing the glass. A shiver ran up her spine as the whispers returned clearer than ever. "Please, release us." The plea tugged at something deep inside her, but with it came a swell of fear. She thought of the winter witch's warning, the terrible image of frost spilling into her world, consuming everything. Already, the signs of its creeping reach were everywhere. Frost on her windows, the unending snow, the cold that no fire could warm. Her thoughts swirled like the snow within the globe. Could she truly consign the tiny kingdom to its icy prison to save her own world? The idea was unbearable. Yet to risk her village, the forests, and the lives of those she knew, was that a price she could pay? "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice cracking. The whispers paused, as though listening. Then they returned, softer this time, almost mournful. "Trust the frost." Era frowned, the words gnawing at her. Trust the frost. The frost had been nothing but pain, a creeping curse that had hollowed out the winter witch and now sought to claim her. Yet, as the phrase echoed in her mind, she felt a flicker of understanding. The frost wasn't merely destruction, it was something deeper. It was the balance between stillness and life, preservation and decay. Her breath hitched as a strange resolve began to take shape. She didn't have to choose between the two worlds. She could wield the frost, not as a weapon or a curse, but as a bridge. Era stood, her heart pounding. She grasped the snow globe tightly, its cold searing her palms, and carried it outside into the night. The snow crunched beneath her boots as she made her way to the center of the clearing. Above her, the stars shimmered like frost on glass, and the world felt impossibly vast and quiet. She placed the snow globe on the ground and knelt before it. Her breath clouded the air as she whispered, "If I do this, I do it for both worlds." The globe pulsed faintly, as though in response. The whispers grew louder, their urgency replaced by something that sounded like hope. Era pressed her trembling hands against the glass, closing her eyes. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she lifted the globe and hurled it against the frozen ground. The sound of shattering glass rang out, impossibly loud, like a bell tolling across the world. A blinding light erupted from the fragments, and Ira was thrown back into the snow. For a moment, she could see nothing but white, hear nothing but the roaring of the wind. When the light faded, she opened her eyes to a world transformed. The snow globe was gone, its fragments melted into the earth. In its place stood a towering portal of shimmering ice, its surface alive with the reflections of two worlds. On one side was her forest, blanketed in fresh snow, but no longer suffocatingly cold. On the other was the kingdom, its towers now glistening with vibrant light, the frost retreating to reveal the colors beneath. Ira watched as the tiny figures emerged from the portal, stepping into their newly freed world. Their faces, once etched with despair, now glowed with wonder and gratitude. They turned to her, their voices soft yet resonant. "Thank you." But as the last of them passed through, the portal began to tremble. The frost surged outward, spreading across the clearing. Ira braced herself, expecting devastation. But the frost stopped short, shimmering like spun silver. It spread evenly, balancing the snow with the thaw. The forest, once smothered in winter, now glowed, with an ethereal light. It was alive. Era sank to her knees, her breath catching in her chest. The cold that had gripped her since she first touched the globe began to fade, replaced by a strange warmth. She looked at her hands. The frost was gone, but her fingers shimmered faintly, as though they now carried the essence of the frost itself. The voices had stopped, the whispers silenced, but she could feel their presence, not as a burden, but as a quiet strength within her. She had become the bridge, the balance between winter's stillness and the world's life. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Era rose, a quiet smile on her lips. She was no longer just a girl with a cursed snow globe. She was the keeper of the frost, a guardian of balance. And the winter that followed would never again be cruel.